This is Rudy Ayala with Spearhead Pest Control in Ventura, California, and you are listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, the Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am your host, Frank Hernandez, here every day discussing all things pest. And I want to remind everybody to join the Pest Geek Society. Join the revolution of what's happening in the pest control industry. Join us on Facebook, Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group. We're also on Twitter. We're on YouTube, pestgeekpodcast.com. Join us. Join in on the conversation. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you need to be more successful. Contribute, engage. And now here's Jeff McGovern with today's topic.
Thank you, Frank. This is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. And for this week's podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about termite inspections and equipment. And this all comes due to a request from Jeff Gorman in Central Florida. Now, with regards to the termite inspection process itself, for that to be successful, you have to actually be in pretty good shape to do the work. If I start back at the beginning of my own career, I was a manager trainee with a large national firm back in the mid-1970s. And in those days, you hired a manager trainee because you needed somebody to crawl under the worst possible crawl spaces on the face of the planet Earth. The kind where you crawl underneath, your back is touching one side, your chest is touching the other, you're squirming under the beams, it's full of water, it's full of animal feces, it's full of cobwebs and God knows what else, and there's weird noises in the background. That's what I started with. I learned how to do termite inspections. And I was encouraged, however, by the salespeople and management team members I worked with because they were always peering through the far end of the crawl space through a vent opening or something like that, encouraging me to crawl in their direction so I could make a proper assessment and evaluation underneath that structure. Now, if we start with the simple stuff, you have 5 senses. You have eyes, you have ears, you have a nose, and you have a mouth, and they're all connected to your head. Plus, you've got the sense of touch, and that's basically your hands and your toes and your feet and that kind of thing, that which you stick out to feel stuff. Now, if we're going to crawl underneath a building, or possibly we're going to go up into an attic area, or some other horrible, bizarre place, we need to be properly protected, starting with the head. Now, I used to wear one of those crazy plastic white bump caps. The kind where you bend over a little bit and it falls off. You look up and it falls off the other way. That's all I had back then. It was all I knew. Well, today you have a vast array of things you can put on your head to keep from getting damage to it. And it may be something along the lines of a ball cap with a protective insert. That's fine. The thing you have to be careful of is a wide brim on the hat, because the reason there's brims on the hat is so you don't get sun glare. Well, when you're in a crawl space or an attic, all that brim does is get in the way. So you want something with a short or maybe even no brim at all. One of the things I've been doing the last few years, when I go under a building or into an attic area, I use my bike helmet. Because I have a simple Bell bike helmet that's all pretty uniform in configuration, and it weighs next to nothing, but it's designed for me to crash into stuff on my bike. It is more than adequate to wear when I'm under a building because it protects my head properly and it buckles in place securely. So I don't have to worry about it falling off. It does not get in my way. Now, if we go down just a little bit, we have to also protect the eyes. Now, a lot of us, as we've gotten older, are wearing eyeglasses just so we can see, or maybe even contact lenses. So you need to wear some type of protective eyewear so that your eyes don't get damaged, or worse yet, can you imagine getting grit and debris up under your contacts? That'd be horrible. So you need to wear some type of a goggle or safety glass appropriate to your face and your condition so you can still see and you don't get them all gunked up with everything and blind yourself under the building. So proper eyewear is important. You also have to protect that nose and mouth from breathing in godforsaken stuff. And when you're in crawl spaces, man, some people just let trash accumulate underneath there. The stench is unbelievable. So you want to make sure you're not breathing all that garbage in. So you want to wear respiratory protection appropriate for the space that you're actually in. The other thing you may want to consider, what if you're up in an attic or crawl space where people were still power dusting it? Well, then you're crawling through possible pesticide. So wear the protection for your nose and your mouth that makes sense for where you're going. Now, you also have to consider protecting your body. And I'm going to suggest here you wear a crawl suit heavy enough to protect you from the pokes and scrapes you're going to find underneath that structure. Along with that, you need to protect your elbows and your knees because those are your mobility devices underneath. So they need a pair of shoes just like your feet. So good elbow pads and good knee pads are going to be important to your longevity in the termite inspection business. At your feet, obviously the proper footwear. The last thing you want to do is crawl into a house in a pair of sneakers or running shoes or track shoes. Put on the proper kind of boots that are secured to your feet so you're not picking up a bunch of crud down in the boot. You don't need to be having things hitching rides home with you, or you don't need to be getting bitten up while you're underneath there by fleas or something else that may be in there. So you want to be completely protected. And that sort of leaves our hands. And our hands are holding equipment. They're pulling us along. They're gouging a hole through debris so we can move. You need to protect the hands, frankly, with cut-resistant gloves. The little plastic gloves that we wear when we're inside treating, absolutely not. You want cut-resistant gloves. You want to compromise between feel and protection so you can move along, feel your way along, and not get skewered by a rusty nail, some type of a spike, piece of metal, piece of glass, what have you. And you know what? Maybe you need a little protection from something that may bite you underneath there. So just consider that as well. So the whole human being is completely protected and encapsulated in something where you can move easily, you can be relatively comfortable, and yet you won't be damaging yourself underneath, around, behind, or on top of that structure. I'm going to expect that you've got proper lighting. Now, a headlamp is fine. I use them myself, and I guess it just depends on how you're moving underneath, because sometimes a headlamp actually gets in the way. But the newer versions can articulate. So if you're crawling at a lower level, you can actually turn it and point it in the right direction. Some of the new really high-tech models, you turn on and off with a gesture in front of the light. So have those options as well. You also need handheld lighting. And as always with a flashlight, I'm going to say 1 is none and 2 is 1. Let me say that again. 1 is none and 2 is 1. Have a backup. Nothing's worse than being in the back end of the most horrible crawl space or attic and the light goes out. Now, that doesn't happen as often as it used to, because the flashlights we have nowadays take far more abuse than the little yellow plastic Bright Star that I started with in the mid-1970s. The batteries last longer. The bulbs are almost indestructible in comparison. So reliable handheld lighting has come light years from what it was back in the 1970s. Now, you also need a simple physical tool to probe different areas or really investigate the wood itself. Now, when I started out, I had like the world's biggest plastic handled screwdriver. Like must have been 3 feet long. But it was rather destructive to some things because of the sharp edges that it had on it. And there's a new tool coming out of a company in California called Inspection Implements Incorporated. The tool is called the Prober, and it's got a very robust rubberized handle on it, and the shaft itself is plated, polished smooth, and rounded at the end. So you can use it as a probing and sounding tool, and the light touch that you may have in some cases will not mar the surface. It really is a very, very good idea for doing termite assessments, evaluations, termite inspections, if you will. And they cost $25 to $27. And I believe Target Specialty carries them on the West Coast. I'm not sure about here out east. But Inspection Implements Incorporated has a website. Go there and take a look at it. I have one and I really like it. I mean, you can move across the wood. If you're doing dry woods, one of the things I learned from the folks in California was they listen for like a paper or ripping sound as they move it over the surface so they can tell where the galleries are just under the surface of the wood. It does a nice job, and it's, the cool thing is something that simple that's really that handy. The other thing you can do with it, it's threaded on one end for a standard painter's pole. So you can actually use it and extend it out and touch and go to areas that maybe you can't quite reach. So it's very, very handy, but it's kind of cool to have a professional inspection tool designed just for those folks that are doing termite inspections. It's neat. Well, now that you've got the physical side done and you've got your prober tool, the other thing, and this is a really delicate subject, you had better be in really good shape to do termite inspections. It's going to require somebody with the physical attributes of a soldier or a sailor or an airman or a Marine. Somebody that can crawl and climb and move and lift their own body weight. And you know what? As we get older, we lose those skills. We get out of shape. And an out of shape, let's just say oversized termite inspector is going to miss stuff. But somebody that's in shape and keeps themselves that way is frankly going to do a far better job. And I know that's a delicate subject. But the reality is, in some cases, maybe as somebody gets older and through no fault of their own, they lose the ability to do the crawling and everything, maybe they mentor the younger and let them do those assessments and evaluations with them as a team. Because that time where you're underneath the house, you're exhausted, you have no air, your stomach is getting caught on stuff, you just don't fit like you used to, and you just, that last 2 or 3 feet, you don't get there. That's where they are, and you miss them. And we all know what happens when you miss them. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Bad things happen down the road from that. So consider what's going on before you crawl under. If you can't do it, you can't do it. But make arrangements for someone that can. Now, the other thing we have to look at is how we document. As far as cameras go, the best, most robust, all-around true camera would be a TG5 Olympus. It's weatherproof, shockproof, crush-proof, freeze-proof, and it takes fabulous photos, has a 16-megapixel main sensor. It'll shoot raw footage. It'll shoot 4K video. And by the way, 4K video is a huge file. If you're going to shoot video, go ahead and shoot 1080p at 60. You're fine with that. 4K is just a monster and it's hard to deal with. Now, that's a general use camera. It also goes to your phone. And just a phone by itself, if you've got anything beyond an iPhone 5 and you have it in a life-proof or maybe catalyst case, it's almost bulletproof itself. And it's shock resistant and waterproof. You'll find the same type of phones available from the Android side instead of iOS with those same cases. Now, the simple drawback there is the touch control screen. If you're all suited up, you may not be able to operate the screen. Now, there is a potential answer to that if you use voice control to actuate the camera. There are two GoPro Hero cameras, the 5 and the 6, that work with voice control. Both of them shoot real high res as far as photos themselves, and they shoot raw footage. And then they also shoot 4K video or anything below it. And one thing about raw footage, if you take a picture, even with a GoPro, in raw footage, you have a huge amount of data in that shot, and you can zoom in post, provided that you've gotten some clear shots, and see a tremendous amount of detail. So that's an option with regards to doing the assessment process and recording and documenting. Now, on the other side of that, with technological help, more things would be like the Termite. The Termite is a really good piece of equipment, and you're all familiar with it. You have the radar option, you have a moisture option, you have a heat option, which is basically a digital scan thermometer, similar to what we use for freezer cooler cases in retail. But it's a good piece of equipment. It's pricey. It's in the $5,000 range. But you know what? If you're doing a lot of termite work, that's a really neat item. And in the correct hands, you can see things that your own senses won't pick up, but the Termite will. Another consideration would be some type of a FLIR camera. And for what we do, the most field durable FLIR cameras would be the C2 or the C3. The difference between those two is only that the C3 has Wi-Fi to your phone. It's a electronic but manual push shutter on the camera. It is a pretty robust shock resistant body. But what that allows you to do with FLIR, because FLIR stands for Forward Looking Infrared, it's actually an acronym, that allows you to see temperature variation. So what that may help you do is identify a moisture condition faster. It's handy. And I've used it in a lot of situations. In my case, though, particularly with rodents, that's real handy finding the warm spots where the rodents may be. Now, the other thing you've got to have as a termite inspector doing assessments and evaluations is a moisture meter. The most common moisture meter in our industry is the Moisture Encounter Plus from Tremex. It's a good, solid unit. It has an analog notification system on it. They're a pad-type system, so you're not actually pushing a pin into the wood, and they work very, very well. If you wear the pads off the back, Tremex can replace them. I believe their U.S. service center is in Colorado still, and they can take care of repairing it. Those instruments will last for decades. The other piece of equipment with regards to termite assessments would be a CO2 detector. Now, there's a company in Melbourne, Florida called Twin Rivers Engineering that makes a CO2 sniffer, if you will, and it is a superb instrument. The gentleman who owns the company derived the CO2 unit from his extremely successful refrigerant gas unit that's sold all over the world. And all he's done is replace the detection filter with one that works for CO2 rather than refrigerant gas. CO2 being the off gas of life, it's not a tricorder, but when you go into a space, you turn the unit on, it measures the ambient level of CO2, and then when you move the wand along the areas you're doing the assessment, it can pick up minute amounts of the off gas of life, which is CO2. Now, is that saying there are termites here? No. It's telling you there's excessive CO2 there, and using your own expertise, you move to that area for more careful assessment and figure out what it really is. So in a very brief period of time, I've bounced right through termite inspections. It is a huge, detailed process that takes a long time to do properly. The more you work at it, the better you get. And we have some serious experts in this industry that do this every single day. They are very, very good at what they do. So at any rate, at that, I will turn it back to Frank. Jeff, thank you so much for your suggestion. You folks have a good week, and we'll talk with you again soon.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.